Ladies and gentlemen, every legendary story of a warrior, a hero, or even a killer usually begins with power, battles, and fear. But sometimes, the most powerful force in the entire story isn't a weapon, a skill, or a fight. Sometimes, it's a single person. And in this story, that person is Aoi. There are moments in life when the smallest act of kindness can echo louder than the most powerful weapon. In a world where fear ruled the streets and violence shaped reputations, the idea that a gentle heart could change anything sounded almost impossible. Yet that is exactly where Aoi's story begins. She was never known for strength in the traditional sense. She didn't carry weapons, she didn't live in the shadows, and she certainly didn't belong to the dangerous world of assassins and criminals. Aoi was the kind of person people might overlook in a crowded city street. Quiet, warm, and sincere. Someone whose presence felt calm even in the middle of chaos. But sometimes the quietest people hold the strongest influence. While the world around her rushed forward with ambition and noise, Aoi moved through life differently. She believed in simple things, honesty, kindness, and the idea that people could change. To many, that belief might have sounded naive. After all, the world isn't always kind, and not every person deserves trust. Yet Aoi carried that belief with her anyway. Her days were ordinary, filled with small routines that most people would consider boring. Work, conversations, moments of laughter with friends, and the peaceful rhythm of daily life. There were no dramatic battles in her story, no grand ambitions to become someone powerful or famous. And perhaps that was exactly what made her special. Because while others chased strength through power or reputation, Aoi's strength came from something far deeper, her ability to see the humanity in people that others had already written off. Even strangers, she had a natural way of making people feel seen. Not judged, not feared, just understood. In a world where so many people hide behind masks, Aoi had a way of looking beyond those masks as if they didn't exist. And that quality would eventually lead her to someone no one else dared to approach. A man whose reputation carried whispers of danger. A man who had spent years building a name that struck fear into the hearts of criminals and enemies alike. A legendary killer. Most people would avoid someone like that without hesitation. Even hearing his name could send chills through a crowded room. People imagined him as something more monster than human, someone who had long ago abandoned the softer parts of his heart. But Aoi never saw the world in such simple terms. To her, people were not just the stories that followed them. They were more than their past, more than their mistakes, more than the rumors others spread about them. And that perspective would lead to something extraordinary. Because when someone like Aoi enters the life of someone consumed by darkness, something unexpected begins to happen. Not immediately, not in some dramatic moment that changes everything overnight. Change begins quietly. It starts with small interactions, brief conversations, moments where the walls someone built around their heart begin to crack ever so slightly. For a person who has lived surrounded by violence and mistrust, even the smallest act of genuine kindness can feel unfamiliar. Almost confusing. And that is exactly what made Aoi's presence so powerful. She didn't try to force change. She didn't demand anything from anyone. Instead, she simply existed as she always had, kind, patient, and sincere. In a world where everyone expected fear and hostility, she offered something entirely different. Understanding. It's easy to underestimate that kind of strength. After all, kindness doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't create explosions or epic battles. But its impact can be far more profound. Because when someone who has only known darkness suddenly encounters genuine warmth, it challenges everything they believed about the world. For someone who had spent years living as a weapon, the idea that another person could look at them without fear, without judgment, was something almost impossible to comprehend. And yet, that is exactly what Aoi did. She didn't see a legend. She didn't see a monster. She simply saw a person. And sometimes, that simple act of seeing someone for who they truly are becomes the first step in changing their entire world. There are meetings in life that feel ordinary in the moment, yet later you realize they changed everything. For someone who had spent years living in the shadows, surviving through silence and violence, the idea that a single encounter could alter the direction of his life seemed impossible. But sometimes destiny does not arrive with noise or drama. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as coincidence. For the legendary killer, life had always followed the same predictable rhythm. Every day was built around discipline, caution, and survival. His world was one where trust did not exist and emotions were considered dangerous distractions. People in that world formed connections only when it served a purpose, and even then those connections were fragile and temporary. He had learned long ago that attachment only created weakness. That belief had shaped everything about him. The way he walked, the way he observed others, the way he kept a constant distance from anyone who tried to get close. His life was built like a fortress, every wall designed to keep the outside world away. And for years, that fortress worked perfectly. No one could reach him. No one could change him. Then one day, he crossed paths with Aoi. At first, the meeting felt insignificant. Just another face in the crowd, another moment that should have passed without leaving any impact. But something about that encounter lingered longer than expected. Aoi did not react the way most people would when they sensed the quiet danger surrounding him. Normally, people felt uneasy around him without even knowing why. Some instinct deep within them would whisper that something about this man was not ordinary. They would avoid eye contact, keep their distance, and move away quickly. But Aoi didn't. She looked at him with the same calm expression she offered everyone else. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation in her voice. Instead, there was something far more confusing, simple kindness. For someone who had spent most of his life surrounded by hostility and suspicion, that reaction was unsettling in an entirely new way. He expected people to fear him. He expected them to judge him. But he did not expect someone to treat him like a normal person. At first, he tried to ignore the encounter. In his world, lingering thoughts about strangers were unnecessary risks. The safest approach was always to move forward without looking back. Yet despite his efforts, that moment kept returning to his mind. There was something different about Aoi, not in a dramatic or mysterious way, but in the quiet confidence she carried. She spoke naturally, as if the dangerous reputation that followed him simply did not exist. That kind of behavior was rare in his world, where people were always calculating, always careful. Aoi seemed completely genuine. That authenticity created a strange curiosity within him. For someone who had trained himself to analyze every situation, every person, every possible threat, this new feeling was difficult to understand. Why would someone act so openly toward a stranger? Why would they show kindness without expecting something in return? Those questions slowly drew him back into Aoi's presence. Their interactions remained small at first. Brief conversations, simple exchanges that most people would consider insignificant. Yet each moment chipped away at the invisible barrier he had built around himself. He began noticing the details about her that others might overlook. The way she listened carefully when someone spoke. The way she offered help without hesitation. The way her laughter seemed to lighten even the dullest surroundings. These were things he had rarely seen in the world he came from. And the more time he spent near her, the more unfamiliar emotions started to surface. Feelings he had buried long ago, believing they had no place in the life he had chosen. But Aoi never tried to force those changes. She never questioned his past or demanded explanations. She simply treated him with the same warmth she showed everyone else. That quiet acceptance created something powerful, a space where he could exist without constantly guarding himself. For the first time in years, he experienced something close to peace. And that was the moment everything truly began to change. Because once someone who has lived in darkness begins to feel even a small glimpse of light, it becomes impossible to forget what that light feels like. For someone who has lived in violence for most of their life, peace can feel unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. When your world has always been built on danger, silence, and survival, the idea of living a calm and ordinary life can seem like something meant for other people, not for you. This was exactly the struggle that began to grow inside the legendary killer as Aoi slowly became a part of his life. At first, he didn't even realize what was happening. The changes were small, almost invisible, the kind of changes that happen quietly over time rather than in dramatic moments. His life, which once revolved around missions and survival, started to include simple everyday experiences he had never truly paid attention to before. Moments that most people would consider normal. Walking through the city without constantly scanning every corner for danger. Sitting down to share a quiet conversation without wondering if someone would betray him. Hearing laughter instead of gunfire. Feeling warmth instead of tension. These were things he had never allowed himself to experience fully. For years, his mind had been trained to think like a weapon. Every movement, every decision, every thought was focused on efficiency and survival. In that world, emotions were distractions that could cost you everything. You learn to ignore them, suppress them, bury them deep enough that they could never interfere with your actions. But Aoi's presence began to challenge that mindset. Not because she tried to change him directly, but because the life she represented was completely different from the one he had known. Her world was built on patience, kindness, and the belief that people deserved the chance to live peacefully. And that idea began to follow him. At first, he resisted it. The habits of a lifetime don't disappear easily. Even during calm moments, his instincts remained sharp. His eyes still watched every movement around him. His body remained ready to react at any second. Old instincts are difficult to silence. Yet slowly, something within him started to shift. When he was around Aoi, that constant tension softened. The walls he had built around himself felt less necessary. He found himself staying longer in places he would normally leave quickly. And most importantly, he began to ask a question he had never seriously considered before. What if there was another way to live? That thought alone was powerful enough to shake the foundation of his identity. After all, his entire reputation was built on being a legendary killer. It was the role he had accepted, the identity that had defined him for years. Walking away from that life was not just a difficult decision, it meant abandoning everything he had ever known. But the more time he spent with Aoi, the more that violent past started to feel distant. Not erased, but distant, because when someone experiences genuine peace after years of chaos, they begin to realize how exhausting that chaos truly was. The adrenaline, the constant alertness, the endless cycle of danger, it had all become normal to him. Yet now he was beginning to see it from a different perspective. Aoi didn't see him as a weapon. She didn't see him as a legend. She saw him as someone capable of living a normal life. That belief slowly planted a new possibility in his mind. A life where he could wake up without thinking about targets. A life where conversations didn't hide danger behind every word. A life where relationships were built on trust rather than survival. It sounded almost impossible, and yet, with Aoi beside him, that impossible idea started to feel real. Of course, the past was never completely gone. Shadows from his former life still existed, waiting quietly in the distance. The world he had once belonged to did not easily forget someone of his reputation. But even knowing that, the choice in front of him became clearer. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving day by day. He was imagining a future. And that future was something he had never believed he deserved. Yet somehow, through Aoi's quiet strength and unwavering kindness, the life of violence that once defined him was beginning to lose its hold. Not because he was forced to abandon it, but because he had finally discovered something far more valuable than the power he once chased. True strength is often misunderstood. Many people believe it comes from power, reputation, or the ability to defeat others. In the world the legendary killer once belonged to, strength was measured by fear. The more dangerous you were, the more respect you commanded. Mercy was seen as weakness, and kindness was something that simply did not exist in that brutal environment. But Aoi's strength was something entirely different. It wasn't loud, it wasn't intimidating, and it certainly didn't come from violence. Her strength came from patience, empathy, and an unshakable belief that people could become better than their past. At first glance, she appeared gentle and ordinary. The kind of person who lived quietly, focusing on the small joys of everyday life. Yet beneath that calm exterior was a resilience that many people would never fully understand. Because it takes incredible strength to remain kind in a world that constantly encourages the opposite. Aoi never tried to fight the darkness surrounding the man she cared about with anger or force. She didn't confront his past with judgment, and she never tried to control his decisions. Instead, she chose something far more powerful. She trusted his ability to change. That kind of trust can be terrifying for someone who has spent their life believing they were beyond redemption. For the legendary killer, Aoi's quiet faith was both comforting and unsettling. He had faced countless enemies without hesitation, yet the idea that someone believed in him challenged him in a way no battle ever had. Violence was something he understood. It followed clear rules: attack, defend, survive. But kindness had no clear rules. It asked questions he had never answered before. Why would someone see good in him when he had done so many terrible things? Why would someone offer warmth when they knew the darkness he carried? These questions slowly forced him to confront something he had avoided for years: his own humanity. For so long, he had convinced himself that he was nothing more than a weapon, a tool shaped by the violent world around him. Accepting that identity made it easier to survive, Weapons do not feel guilt. Weapons do not need forgiveness. But Aoi refused to see him that way. Her strength came from her ability to look beyond the reputation everyone feared and recognize the person hidden beneath it. She didn't pretend his past didn't exist. Instead, she believed it didn't have to define his future. That belief became a powerful force in his life. Whenever doubts surfaced, whenever the weight of his past threatened to pull him back into the darkness, Aoi remained steady. She never pressured him with dramatic speeches or emotional demands. Instead, she simply continued to live with the same quiet kindness that had first caught his attention. Her consistency was what made the difference. Because change does not happen instantly. It requires time, patience, and the presence of someone who refuses to give up on you even when you struggle to believe in yourself. Aoi provided exactly that. Her influence slowly reshaped the way he saw the world. The violent path he once walked no longer seemed inevitable. The anger and survival instincts that once controlled every decision began to lose their power. Not because he forgot his past, but because he finally believed something greater was possible. And that transformation was not the result of force or persuasion. It came from the quiet strength of someone who chose compassion over judgment, patience over fear, and hope over despair. In many ways, Aoi proved something extraordinary. The strongest force in any story is not always the one that fights the hardest. Sometimes, the strongest force is the one that refuses to stop believing in someone, even when the entire world has already given up on them. Every story we hear, every journey we witness, carries a message that goes beyond the characters themselves. The story we explored today is not only about a legendary assassin, dangerous missions, or a violent past. At its heart, it is a story about change, redemption, and the incredible power of human connection. For years, the man we talked about lived in a world defined by fear and survival. His life was built on strength, skill, and the reputation of being someone no one could defeat. In that world, emotions were weaknesses and trust was a risk that could cost you everything. Day after day, he walked a path where violence was normal and peace was almost impossible to imagine. But what makes this story powerful is the reminder that no matter how dark someone's past may be, the future is never completely written. People are not trapped forever by the mistakes they made or the lives they were forced to live. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who believes in them to begin changing the direction of their life. Aoi represented something he had never truly experienced before: genuine kindness without fear, patience without judgment, and belief without conditions. She did not try to erase his past or pretend it never existed. Instead, she showed him that the past does not have to control the future. Through her quiet strength, he began to understand that true power does not come from violence or fear. True power comes from the ability to choose a different path, even when it is difficult. It comes from protecting the people you care about, building a life that has meaning beyond survival, and discovering that peace can be stronger than any weapon. This journey reminds us that change rarely happens in dramatic moments. More often, it begins with small choices, moments of kindness, trust, and hope that slowly reshape the direction of someone's life. And when those moments continue to grow, they can transform even the most hardened hearts. In the end, the most important lesson from this story is simple but powerful. No matter who someone was in the past, they still have the ability to become someone new. The road may be difficult, and the shadows of the past may never completely disappear, but the possibility of change will always exist. And sometimes, the greatest transformation begins not with power, but with a single person who refuses to stop believing. Because in the end, even the deadliest weapon can choose to become a protector when it finally finds something worth protecting.